The first time Elliot Ryder mentioned sneaking into Bohemian Grove, I thought he was joking. We were sitting on the deck of his parents' lake house in Santa Rosa, California, about 20 miles from the infamous campground. With a beer in hand and a conspiratorial grin, Elliot leaned in and said, "Let's do it. Let's see what they're hiding in there." "You mean the place where billionaires and politicians meet to burn an effigy under a giant owl statue?" I laughed, shaking my head. "You've been watching too many documentaries." Elliot's grin widened. "I'm serious, Lucas. There's no security this time of year. The next retreat isn't until summer. If we go now, we'll have the place to ourselves." Elliot had always been the reckless one, the guy who thrived on danger and adrenaline. I, on the other hand, was the cautious type. But something about his suggestion intrigued me. Bohemian Grove had been the subject of countless conspiracy theories, from secret government meetings to occult rituals. "What's the worst that could happen?" Elliot pressed. "We get caught and fined? It's worth it for the story alone." Against my better judgment, I agreed. On a cold December evening, we parked Elliot's Jeep just off Bohemian Avenue, a winding road that led to the gated entrance of Bohemian Grove. Armed with flashlights, a pair of bolt cutters, and a GoPro, we slipped into the woods and followed a narrow trail toward the campgrounds. The forest was eerily silent, save for the crunch of our boots on the frost-covered ground. Towering redwoods loomed above us, their gnarled branches casting ghostly shadows in the moonlight. "Did you know," Elliot whispered, "that some of the most powerful men in the world have walked these trails? Nixon, Reagan, both Bushes, even Kissinger." "I've heard," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the path. "You think they're just having frat parties out here?" He stopped and turned to me, his face lit by the glow of his flashlight. "That's the cover story, but people have heard chanting, seen strange fires. It's more than just rich guys partying." The first sign of the Grove's infamous gatherings was the Owl Shrine. We stumbled upon it about 30 minutes in. A massive stone owl carved into the hillside, its hollow eyes staring blankly into the forest. "This is it," Elliot said, his voice tinged with awe. "The cremation of care happens right here." He pointed to the small amphitheater below the owl, where rows of wooden benches faced a stone altar. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, as if the space itself held the weight of decades of secrets. "Creepy," I muttered, scanning the area with my flashlight. Elliot pulled out his GoPro and began filming. "Think about it, Lucas. All the stuff we've read about. The sacrifices, the chants. It's happened right here." I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. "Let's take a few pictures and get out of here." "Not yet," Elliot said. "I want to see the inner camp." The deeper we ventured into the grove, the stranger things became. We passed cabins with locked doors and boarded windows, fire pits filled with charred logs, and stacks of folding chairs arranged in odd, almost ritualistic patterns. It wasn't until we reached the clubhouse, a large wooden building in the heart of the camp, that I began to feel truly uneasy. The structure was grand yet uninviting, its windows dark and its front door slightly ajar. "You think anyone's here?" I whispered. Elliot shook his head. "Not this time of year, but we should check it out." Reluctantly, I followed him inside. The clubhouse smelled of damp wood and mildew, the air thick with an odd metallic tang. Elliot's flashlight swept across the room, revealing a cavernous space filled with long tables, empty chairs, and faded banners bearing the Bohemian Club's emblem, a white owl perched atop a crescent moon. "It's like a ghost town," Elliot whispered. his voice echoing in the stillness. As we moved deeper into the building, we came across a bar lined with dusty bottles of expensive liquor. On the counter sat a guest book, its pages filled with names and dates that spanned decades. Elliot ran his fingers over the pages. Look at this. Nixon, Reagan, Kissinger, they were all here. Take a picture and let's go, I urged, my nerves fraying. But Elliot was already moving toward a staircase at the back of the room. There's got to be more upstairs. Reluctantly, I followed him up the creaking stairs. The second floor was darker, colder, and infinitely more unsettling. The hallway was lined with doors, each marked with a simple brass plaque. One door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar. A faint, flickering light spilled out, casting strange shadows on the walls. "You seeing this?" Elliot whispered, his excitement barely contained. Maybe we shouldn't. But he was already pushing the door open. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single chair facing an old television set. The screen glowed with static, casting an eerie light over the room. On the floor lay a circle of burnt candles and an assortment of strange symbols etched into the wooden planks. "Is this some kind of ritual space?" Elliot murmured, stepping inside. I hesitated at the doorway, every instinct screaming at me to leave. "Elliot, let's go. This feels wrong." Before he could respond, the television flickered and went dark. A sudden, sharp knock echoed through the building. Both of us froze, our eyes snapping to the doorway. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of footsteps echoing through the clubhouse. "We need to leave. Now," I whispered, grabbing Elliot's arm. He nodded, his bravado finally replaced by fear. We moved quickly and quietly back down the stairs, but as we reached the main hall, the front door slammed shut. The footsteps grew louder, circling us. "Who's there?" Elliot called out, his voice trembling. No response. Then, from the direction of the owl shrine, we heard it, a low, guttural chant carried on the wind. We bolted out the back door of the clubhouse, plunging into the woods. The chanting grew louder, mingling with the crunch of footsteps behind us. "Who's following us?" I gasped, struggling to keep up with Elliot. "I don't know," he yelled, glancing over his shoulder. The woods seemed to close in around us, the towering redwoods casting long, twisting shadows. Every step felt like we were running in circles, the pit back to the car eluding us. Suddenly, Elliot stopped. "What are you doing?" I hissed. He pointed ahead. In the clearing stood a group of figures, their faces obscured by black hoods. They surrounded a large stone altar, and on it lay an object covered with a crimson cloth. "We have to go back," I whispered, pulling at his arm. But Elliot's eyes were locked on the scene, his curiosity overpowering his fear. "We have to see what they're doing." As we crept closer, the chanting grew clearer. The figures spoke in a language I didn't recognize, their voices rising and falling in unison. One of them pulled back the cloth on the altar, revealing a lifelike effigy. It was human-shaped, but the way it gleamed in the firelight made my stomach churn. Elliot raised his GoPro, filming the scene. "We shouldn't be here," I whispered, gripping his sleeve. Before he could respond, the chanting stopped. Every hooded figure turned to face us. The figures moved fast, faster than seemed humanly possible. Within seconds, they surrounded us, their hands grabbing and pulling as we struggled to break free. "Let go of me!" Elliot screamed, thrashing against their grip. I fought too, but it was no use. They were too strong. They dragged us back to the altar, forcing us to kneel in front of the towering owl shrine. One of the figures stepped forward, their hood falling back to reveal a weathered face. The man looked familiar, his sharp features and piercing eyes striking a chord of recognition. "Is that?" I began, but the man raised a hand, silencing me. "You've trespassed where you don't belong," he said, his voice calm yet cold. "And now you will serve a purpose." The hooded figures dragged Elliot toward the altar, ignoring his screams and thrashing. I fought against my captors, desperation fueling my strength, but their grip was unyielding. "Lucas, help me," Elliot cried, his voice raw with terror. "I'm trying," I shouted, panic choking me. They forced him onto the altar, pinning his arms and legs as the leader raised a long, ceremonial dagger. The chanting resumed, louder and more frenzied, echoing through the forest like a dark hymn. "This is insane. You don't have to do this," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. The leader didn't even glance at me. He began to speak in that strange, guttural language, his voice resonating with an unnatural power. The dagger gleamed in the firelight as he brought it down, plunging it into Elliot's chest. Elliot's scream was cut short, his body convulsing before falling limp. The fire roared higher, as if consuming his essence. The hooded figures threw their arms into the air, their chanting reaching a deafening crescendo. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare in horror as my best friend's life was extinguished in front of me. As the flames danced higher, the grip on my arms slackened. The figures seemed entranced, their attention focused solely on the ritual. Taking advantage of the distraction, I yanked free and bolted into the woods. Branches whipped against my face as I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The chanting grew distant, replaced by the sound of my pounding heart. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled onto the road where we'd parked the Jeep. The vehicle was still there, covered in a thin layer of frost. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to unlock the door. As I started the engine, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. One of the hooded figures stood at the edge of the woods watching me. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I floored the gas and sped away, the Jeep skidding on the icy road as I put as much distance between myself and the grove as possible. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elliot's face, his terror, his pain, his lifeless body on that altar. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to tell someone, to expose what was happening at Bohemian Grove. I uploaded the footage from my phone to my laptop, but much of it was corrupted. Static and distortion obscured most of the audio and visuals. Still, there was enough to show the owl shrine, the altar, and the hooded figures. I contacted a few journalists, sending them copies of the footage along with my account of what had happened. At first, they seemed interested, but their responses quickly became vague and dismissive. Then, the harassment began. It started with anonymous phone calls. At first, just silence on the other end, then breathing, then distorted voices whispering things I couldn't understand. Packages arrived at my doorstep, containing dead animals and cryptic notes. One simply read, "Silence is golden." I began to notice unfamiliar cars parked near my apartment, their occupants always staring at me when I left. My social media accounts were hacked, and my emails to journalists mysteriously vanished from my sent folder. One night, I came home to find my apartment ransacked. Nothing was stolen, but a single photograph of Elliot and me was left on the coffee table. A red X scrawled over his face. I tried to report the harassment to the police, but they were dismissive. Without solid proof, they said, there was little they could do. "You're imagining things," one officer told me. "You've been through a trauma. Maybe you should talk to someone about it." I knew I wasn't imagining it. The Grove's reach was too powerful, its secrets too well protected. Eventually, I stopped trying to expose the truth. The harassment didn't stop completely, but it lessened. The message was clear. As long as I stayed quiet, I was safe. Years have passed, but the memories of that night still haunt me. I moved far away from Santa Rosa, changed my name, and cut ties with anyone who might connect me to Elliot. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers outside my window, or catch a glimpse of a shadow that doesn't belong. And I wonder, did I truly escape? As for Elliot, the world will never know what happened to him. His disappearance remains unsolved, his name just another footnote in the Grove's dark history. And me, I'm left with the guilt of surviving, the burden of knowing what I can never tell, because some truths are too dangerous to share.